Well, you say, oh, come on now. How can he get it right? Has anyone ever heard of the horizon problem in astronomy? This is the problem stated. Again, my poor artmanship. Let's say, for instance, there's a galaxy, a star system. What is known in astronomy today is that space, parts especially that are vacant, there's not a system there. When you're talking about space, it's eerily, when it comes to temperature, uniform. So what is the horizon problem? Well, let's say, for instance, Mr. Dawkins puts the Earth at approximately 4.6 billion years, right? Let's say there's and now that we have technology that can reach out, quote unquote, let's say on each side, 20 million or 20 billion light years. Here. The same over here. So here's the problem. If we can measure these solar systems, and they're the same, that we can determine by their color and such that the solar systems are, or the space is the same, eerily close to temperature-wise, then the influence of light, this is why we study a little bit of light. Light is energy, right? What happens? Well, now it's a little cool because it's overcast. But next week, they're talking 90 degrees, right? And you go out there and you get some good ice cream, right? Or yogurt or whatever you like. And what happens to it? Melts kind of quick, doesn't it? Why is that? Because light is energy, right? Light is energy. Now, here's the problem. If we're going to say this is 4.6 billion years, and this part is the same as this part, well, there's a problem here. Because of what? You've got 20 billion light years, right? And the Earth is 4.6 billion years. Hasn't even reached it yet. How can the universe be so, when it comes to temperature, be so uniform? Now they have speculations about that, and that's fine. They'll say that going back to the Big Bang theory, and again, as Ahmed, we talked a little bit about the Big Bang theory. When evolutionists use it, they usually mean that there's something exploded. Creationists sometimes use it, saying that this is the active work of God. So we have to be very careful about that. So when we discuss this about timing, and these aren't the only reasons, it points more and more to what Moses was talking about, 6 literal days of creation. Because the Creator, when he made the stars, the solar systems, something else as we're going to, well, we're not there yet. We're going to see is the conservation of motion, and we're going to look at the universe, and we're going to see like galaxies, and going to be some open spaces, and what have you. God created these. Let's also talk a little bit about this matter of Pilton man, and why is this important. We spend just a little bit of time of dating that Pilton man can't be 800,000 years or 1,000,000 years. As a matter of fact, he was found to be one of the greatest hoaxes. They drilled into, I believe, his jawbone, and they found that it was not a fossil at all. Think on that. All of the textbooks that were written, unchallenged, in Europe, United States, other portions of the world, and it was found a hoax in 1953. The Nebraskan man was compiled, and a composite was made and found in some textbooks, and they found that all from, they call it a tooth of a pig, but it's a peccary. It's a form of pig. It's like a javelina, if you've ever been in the southwestern United States. These are the kinds of things that the propagandists, that those that would try to indoctrinate our children, to state that we're no different than an animal, these are the kinds of things that they'll put forth and they'll put in our textbooks. As a matter of fact, when Hannah and Lydia were young, we would go to Wendy's. And you know how kids are. They don't go for Wendy's. They want to have the Happy Meal, right? Because there's going to be dinosaurs or something like that, right? And they get the facts wrong. And then when our children grow up and they don't accept what we taught them or the concerns that we have, it's because they've had a lifetime, in a matter of speaking, where we've only had a few minutes to discuss. But it doesn't matter what you and I think. It really boils down to the evidence, doesn't it? Now, there's no evidence when we speak about these fossils. None whatsoever. And yet, it's built upon assumption, upon assumption, upon assumption, and to date. As a matter of fact, when we get into the strata level, they'll say if you find some bones or some organisms in the time, you can go to the geological record or to the levels to age the bones. And then when you want to date the bones, it's circular reasoning. You either go to the strata, or you go to the bones, or you go to the bones to go to the strata. They meet themselves coming and going. There's no evidence for that. Well, what happened in the flood? Well, in the book of Job, remember Leviathan. Start about chapter 36 to about 42. We have descriptors. Could there have been dinosaurs on the ark? Oh, yes. Absolutely. And not all of this species at the time would have had to survive. Just those that God would have determined. So we have Nebraska Man, mid-1920s. Scopes monkey trial, I believe they did not try to use that because it was so far-fetched. But yet Pilton Man was a hoax, and that was one of the central cases where they find a distinction between animal and what we call animal and man, right? It's supposed to be a missing link. Nothing but a hoax. 1974, we come to, I believe, Ethiopia, and I remember this explicitly when it comes to National Geographic. So if you have time, go to your library, search these things out. Lucy. Anybody remember Lucy? Okay, several of us remember Lucy. And supposed to be the missing link, right? Ape and man. See, we're in the mind of the Darwinist, there's no difference between a dog, a squirrel, a chimpanzee, and a human being. We're all animals, right? And for this reason, life is cheap, right? Where you have a believing view, if we're created in the image of God, that life is precious and life is important. But Lucy, they found, I believe, about 40%. Now, Nebraska Man was just a molar, just a tooth. And they had all that composite and all that implication just based upon a tooth, mind you, right? Lucy, I think they found about 40% of the bone count. And they said that this was definitely a missing link, about a 3-foot chimpanzee or ape, right? As a matter of fact, in National Geographic, they would show pictures, or they would make composites and showing that Lucy had human appendages, even though there were no foot bones or what have you found. Now, why is this important? Well, later down the road, especially in the 80s, they found that there was nothing different between Lucy. It was just another, or at least that scientists, and they'll agree, for the most part, it was nothing more than some form of chimpanzee or primate. Well, there again, we have more and more implication and those things that try to mind and mold the minds of children apart from evidence. See, there are no fossils that show what Moses talked about. That things do what? Reproduce after their own kind. We don't have speciation. We don't have evidence or fossils of animal, or I should say rather reptiles, evolving into higher forms. As a matter of fact, they say that embryology, when you look at different types of pictures of children in the womb, that they have gill slits in their production, and therefore it shows remnants when man was a fish or man later was a reptile, and we have vestiges of that in embryology. But nothing can be further from the truth. There's no evidence of that. Moses got it right. So when we talk about the fossil record, what is it? What does it support? The fossil record supports creation and a young earth worldview. This is what the evidence points toward. Now again, we talked a little bit about the two worldviews: Darwin, naturalistic evolution, macroevolution; Moses, creation, design. The evidence points that we've been created, and that species, that animals. You know, again, I mentioned, how many in here plant a garden? Let me ask you a question. I never really got to, well, I did. I planted corn some years ago, and you know, all the critters came and got it. And I've lived in areas where we don't have 120 days. So, you know, I'm always looking forward, and I was gonna harvest the next day. But let me ask you a question. When you plant corn, do you expect to see a whale at the end? No? How about a rabbit? You don't expect things like that. There's what's called the law of biogenesis, which is a little bit deeper because we haven't really touched on everything. Life, as we can determine in carbon, not silica, but carbon, one of those building blocks of elements, right? But yet when we talk about the law of biogenesis, I believe it was by Mr. Pastern, about 100 years ago, or a little more than 100 years ago, understood there's a physical law. When we speak of rocks, silica, or other types of trace minerals, can life emanate from stones? No, they cannot. They cannot. But this is exactly what's being taught. Exactly what's being taught. Let's go to our next section. We'll have questions and answers. Some matters of physics. There are laws. Now we mentioned laws of physics, just briefly. When it comes to matter, what is understood, that matter does not come into existence, especially living matter, but does not come into existence nor is destroyed naturally. When we speak about energy and the second law of thermodynamics, if the Earth rotates on its axis, now they're finding, and they're talking about having leap seconds. Why would that be significant? The Greeks thought that all matter is eternal. Later on they find, and as they study this matter of matter, thermodynamics, things break down, right? Things break down. How about the Earth? We're traveling at what, close to 24,000 miles an hour, right? To go around the Earth. Does anybody feel that? Or from our perspective, because of gravity, we feel that it's rock solid, right? But because that's energy, is that eternal? Or will it break down? Will it wear down? We understand that, right? We get a little bit older, right? We get those pains. We say, I'm just worn out, right? Well, now they're saying that they can actually take measurements of the Earth. And it could be, we're finding that the rotation of the Earth is actually in nanoseconds slowing down. Now, what does that agree more with? an eternal viewpoint of matter or the second law of thermodynamics? Second law of thermodynamics. See, when we look at physics and when we talk about true science, what Moses wrote, what is known. Now, I realize some people postulate things, but what can be confirmed go hand in hand with what Moses wrote, and less of some of the precepts of Darwin and Darwinism. Matter of fact, we mentioned the conservation of momentum. Why then, whether we call it a bang of creation, and I'm not saying using the definition term of the Big Bang by our creationist theory, why is this important? Because all of us at one time, how many have thrown stones in a creek? All of us, for the most part, right? When we talk of matter, when it's thrown out, and especially from an angular standpoint, it has a tendency to keep moving in the same direction. That's simple stuff, isn't it? Well, we don't need our PhDs. I mean, I get some donkeys and some posthole diggers, right? But we don't need our PhDs, do we, to figure that out? No. But yet, in our solar system, are there a couple planets that don't rotate on an axis the same direction that we do in the Earth? There's two, aren't there? Uranus, and what was the other? Someone help me. Venus. They go the opposite direction. So when we look at this, why then does that occur? Unless it was designed that way. So when it's all said and done, and we're just touched not even the hem of the garment, I hope we can look at and we can disseminate and determine from just some simple laws. And what those that would try to indoctrinate our children, whether or not what they're saying is true. And I want to suggest to you that Darwin got it wrong, and Moses got it right. I'd like to open up any questions. Well, I'll just leave that up there. Yes, Ahmed. I see from the smile you're thinking of one.
First of all, just want to clarify one thing. As a Muslim, we don't believe in Darwinism. In the form, in the way that we evolved from monkeys. Let's put it this way. But I want to go back to the light part that you mentioned.
Please.
Light. Some people say, how come you have light without sun? And you explained it beautifully when you said that there are type of lights like the infrared and gamma and all these rays.
Yes, and nobody argues that.
Yes, but the argument is not how come there would be light before the sun. The argument is how you can have day and night without the sun.
I see.
This is the argument.
This is a good question. And when we talk about this in Hebrew, that there has to be qualifiers. And the reason why we have that perception, for instance, we know the sun was not in existence until, what was it, the fourth day. So up to the third day when we have vegetation, God said, depending on what version, it was morning and then evening one day. So what we have is a perspective that we can apprehend, meaning we don't have all of the mechanics. We can say without equivocation it was 24-hour period of time, because today, it's just like with the earth, we know the earth, the sun does not set, right? And even that's an argument that some use against the Quran, the setting, that it's a perspective. So this is a reason why when we speak about the 24-hour periods of time, Yom, it's qualified, morning and evening. So the period of time is a day, a 24-hour period of time. Not necessarily that it's used specifically, since we don't have the sun, we have that cycle. Secondly, when we come to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, we have Adam and Eve in the first marriage, don't we? That's called a prolepsis, because it said that man will leave father and mother. See, Adam and Eve had a perfect marriage. Why? There are no in-laws, right? Hello. Everybody sleeping now? They didn't have any in-laws, right? Now you thought I was going to say mother-in-laws, but we got some women folks, so I'm just going to keep it generic, okay? But that's a perspective. So we understand it in that light. We understand in that light. Did that help a little bit?
Well, it's a big debate, so
It's no problem.
Time will not fit.
And if we need to debate that, maybe we can find a congregation here that would, or in this area, we can discuss that.
Well, this is, Brother Ken, this is not my cup of tea.
No problem. Mashallah.
I'm just an open-minded person that I'm trying to seek the truth from you. Maybe you can convince me about if it's necessary to have the sun after creation, the day of and the night.
Right, because it seems like a contradiction.
Yes.
Before you have the sun, and it's using those terms of sunset or morning and evening until the fourth day of creation. But again, this was written after the fact, and it's written in language that we can understand. Not necessarily, because there's also a question, Ahmed. If we have day 3, where we have the herbs and the grasses, and we don't have a sun for the day, how can they survive? But what's interesting is we have the alternative thought where you got millions and billions of years. Now, pray tell, what is more plausible? One day creating herbs and grasses, the next day the sun, or millions and billions of years between the days or the eons of time? It comes down to perception. And I think again, Moses wrote that, so I don't see a contradiction, but it's a good point to bring up. Why? But it's written so that we can understand that Yom is qualified as 6 literal days.
Yom means, Yom in Arabic, you can take it in 2 different meanings.
Absolutely, and you can also in Hebrew.
Yes, Yom means either 24 hours a day, 24 hours, or day means, well, it's just 24 hours.
In the first surah, in the 2nd verse, Maliki Yom Medin, the owner, the monarch of the day of judgment.
Yes.
Right? And that's a futuristic time or what have you, but see, Hebrew does the same. The qualifiers are that a morning and evening, and that's why we can determine that's a 24-hour period of time, not eons of time.
But since you mentioned that verse in the Quran, Malik Yawmiddin, which is the day of judgment, that day is considered 50,000 years of what we count.
Yes.
That's the days.
Understood. But since all 3 are Semitic languages, Arabic, Aramaic, and Hebrew, they have qualifiers. And the qualifiers for the morning and the evening, this is the reason why we take this as 24-hour period of time. Any other?
Last thing.
Okay.
I just want to say that for us, it doesn't matter if the day is 24 hours
Yes.
or 1,000 years. Because
Yes.
It's irrelevant to us. We believe that God created everything. He can create everything in 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not a really big deal with us if it's 24 hours or 1,000 years. But I just wanted to know your point of view, because you can go and ask, when do you consider something is created? When the creation starts, or like for example, when you consider yourself you planted a tree, when you put the seed in the ground, or when the tree became matured and start to bring fruits. So
That's an easy one, Ahmed. One is when we talk about, for instance, man. When Adam and Eve were created by God, they were full grown, right? This is a reason why we look at that, and we hold those views. Let me let me address this, and I wasn't trying to imply that all Muslims believed in Darwinism. That wasn't my implication. But it's interesting to note, because I did go to Islamic University and took some classes in the miracles of the Quran and the Sunnah. But there's a gentleman, I believe, of Muhammad Wagdi. He is also on YouTube. But he's an astrophysicist. And it's interesting that the more of the astrophysicists that are Muslim and that are educators, they hold more of a view of Moses than they might call the day 1,000 years. But when we talk about the creation of the world, say within a framework of 10,000 years, we're in the ballpark. Whereas Muslim scholars that study, for instance, in philosophical schools, and a lot of times that gets interwoven with skepticism, they come up with these theories, much like we see in Christendom. And unfortunately, brethren, we've got some folks in the Lord's church that teach that there are eons of times, like Abilene Christian University and others. My point is this, what does the evidence support? A young earth or eons of time? I look at it, and my understanding is that we live on a relatively young earth, and Moses got it right. And these are things that I think are most important because, for instance, since Ahmed is going to bring up some questions, we didn't talk about this, and I should have. There are some statements in the Quran that are difficult to answer. For instance, it was in chapter 83, where we have put a bulge in the earth. And the reason I bring this up, also the things are created in pairs, which go with the genome, what goes in the microscopic study. So the reason I bring it up is because not only do we need to know answers when it comes to matters of biology, astronomy, we call these disciplines, but also when Muslims come and challenge us, that they have a better or more new, a better, well, the Quran means recitation, but their scriptures are superior to the Bible. We need to know these things. We need to give a better answer. So this is the reason that I bring it up. And I think this is a good question that you formulate and you bring up as well. Did I answer some of those?
Thank you.
I think I saw a hand back here. No?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to emphasize the importance of perspective and also the qualifiers of what is day and what is night. That in Genesis 1 in verse 2, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's verse 3, and then verse 4, the separation of the light and day became the first, or the light and darkness became the first day.
Okay.
So that's the qualifier of what was the first day. And then introducing the sun as the instrument of how to determine when night and day occurred came later.
Yes, and stars for seasons.
Yes. So there was first just the separation of light and darkness. Then there was the introduction of the sun. But the light and darkness became the cycle of the first day.
Yes.
And then in the process of creation, then the stars, the sun, etc., were introduced and became part of that cycle and of that determination and definition. So the qualifiers are important.
Yes.
And then also to emphasize that as far as qualifiers are concerned, that they can be literal or it can be figurative, as I'm sure that you would agree.
Yes, and the Quran, like I said, sometimes we that might be critical of the Quran, we take things out of context, right? Because we know the sun does not set in a marsh or something, but we know it's for explaining a perspective, right? Where also in the book of Genesis and other places, when it speaks about a future day or what have you, and some things are parallel and coincide with your understanding of the Quran, it qualifies that day, right, as a time, as a period of time. But there's no question when it comes to the usage of verbiage here that Moses in Genesis chapter 1 that it's 6 literal days. 6 literal days, not eons of time. And it would, if we're looking at the integrity as well as, and what's important for us, Ahmed, is that if this is the word of Moses, the word of God, and he said 6 days, he means 6 days. And it's qualified. And theistic evolution, the reason that we do not look at it as viable is because it violates the law of Genesis, the law of one kind going into the next. And this is very important. So we do have that day-age theory because we have those brethren that want to make compromise between the world and the Scripture, and it does not fit. You ever heard, always stay on one side of the road? Why is that? Because you go in the middle, you're going to get hit by both sides, right? And that's the same thing when it comes to the day-age theory or when it comes to theistic evolution. Any other questions? No more? Yes.
You're talking about Mount Everest.
Yes.
I heard Paul Harvey in one of his rest of the story comments years ago said that Mount Everest was once upon a time an island in the South Sea.
Well, we don't know. And since we brought this up and we didn't really develop it, and if we can just take a couple minutes, why does the book of Moses and the flood answer the fossil record? We didn't take a great deal of time of petrification. I thought we'd get more into the DNA, but that's fine. And there's not a great deal. I mean, we have fossils, right? They're numbered, right? But not everything that died on this earth is fossilized, is it? Petrified, right? It's not. So what happens? Like when they find, and I get nervous because, as you can tell, I really cannot draw. It's pitiful. But when you have tails that go up through different kinds of strata of dinosaurs and the like, it shows more of a cataclysmic that's hard to imagine. You have various types of rocks. Sedimentary rock is formed by this. Igneous rock and what have you is a different process. But yet, when we think of this, this is plausible. This is something that we can look at. We can look at the fossil record. When it dips up, and some of them are inverted, some of them are laid down, it takes a cataclysmic event, a grave, so to speak, a quick fixing of events. And this is what we see in the book of Genesis chapter 6, the great flood. And I believe also, Ahmed, in the Quran, that I think there's a close proximity of what the Quran says, with the exception. Moses tells us that there were 8 souls saved, as well as the book of Peter. But if I remember correctly, in the Quran, there are more than just Noah's family, if I'm correct about this. There's more than just Noah. There's more than just eight souls being saved.
It's Noah's and some of the believers.
Yes, yes. And if people have an interest, a reason that, and correct me on this, Ahmed, that people look, or I should say Muslims look at Adam, or we would say in the Arabic, Adam, as one of the first prophets of God, the first Rasul of God, and this kind of thing. But there are some closeness, and of course there are things that we vastly differ on as well. Okay. But yet, going back to the evidence, the same evidence exists for us as anyone else. And I hope as we have opportunity in our lives to study more, maybe have an appetite to do these things, young folks, when they go to college, when they go into various kinds of training, as folks a little bit older, take opportunity to discuss the evidence and the world that was, and of course, the book of Moses. And again, I'd like to point out, at least in my estimation, my understanding of truth, Moses got it right, and Darwin got it wrong. Is that all right? Any other questions? Well, again, I appreciate very much GBN coming and taping this. I appreciate very much your participation. And if you have any questions, you can look on our website. I have, not only can you call here, but I think I have my personal phone number. And